My guest today is Courtney Klein. She is the co-founder of All One Thing, that's all about building intergenerational learning spaces, and the co-founder of Sunschool, creating an open source AI tutor for educational transparency. Courtney also serves as a senior strategist and advisor to ASU Prep. She is an Edmund Hillary Fellow, which is a prestigious fellowship for social impact entrepreneurs in New Zealand. She previously co founded and led SeedSpot, a top ranked social impact incubator recognized globally and awarded an Emmy for its partnership with Univision. Courtney launched her first nonprofit at the age of 21, later acquired by Participate Learning, where she now serves on the board. Her honors are many and include top 30 civic leaders under 30, Arizona's most influential millennials, top 10 business people of the year, and most intriguing chief executives. Courtney Klein, welcome to the LiberatED podcast.
Thank you. So excited to be here, Carrie. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you here. We've connected multiple times in the past, and I've just been so interested in your journey as an entrepreneur and also as someone who's sort of supporting today's education entrepreneurs and reimagining teaching and learning and really leaning into unconventional education. So it's so delightful to have you on the podcast today. And I'd love to start with kind of the early days of your entrepreneurial journey. I mean, you launched your first nonprofit enterprise at the age of 21. You've been building ventures ever since. So, what initially drew you to entrepreneurship and specifically social impact entrepreneurship?
Sure. It was not a journey that I thought I would be on, to be honest. I thought I was going to become Katie Couric and work on New York on national television. So I entered Arizona State University as a broadcast major in the Cronkite School of Journalism. But after my freshman year in college, I went on like a volunteer trip abroad. We were in Mexico and I saw firsthand the developing world and realized that my K-12 education really had not prepared me for understanding the broader context of the world. It was a fairly traditional public school and I wasn't really aware of international issues or what I could do at a young age to create change even in my own local community. And so I came back from that trip pretty transformed and pretty shaken and disillusioned a bit by the K-12 system. And so I changed my major to nonprofit management and decided that I was going to launch a nonprofit when I graduated. And that nonprofit was going to educate high school students about how to create change in their own communities, how to identify social problems, whether it's locally or globally, and then take action to actually change those things. And so I went through my undergrad then as a nonprofit management major. And in my senior year, Arizona State had a fund available for early stage entrepreneurs to apply for funding. And so I applied, and there's a funny backstory. I was told I was receiving $20,000. It turned out to be $1,000 after I had turned down all my job offers that I was out for in my senior year in college. But with a whopping $1,000, I decided that I would just go for it. And so I built then a nonprofit that would go into high schools and run an after school program to do just that. And so, my journey started very young, made a ton of mistakes, learned a lot, and that kind of kicked off my journey as an early stage founder.
Yeah, so then what happened next? I mean, you founded Seed Spots, this prestigious incubator startup accelerator program. Was that sort of the next step for you, or what happened after this initial nonprofit?
Yeah, the initial nonprofit, I think I learned, one, so much just about entrepreneurship, about leadership, about hiring, about team building, about operations and finance. And it was hard. Like I, had a nonprofit management degree, but so much of the business aspects and the entrepreneurial hustle and the capital raising and it was not included. And so I found myself as I exited that first organization, really talking to other founders around Phoenix at the time, sitting nights and weekends at coffee shops, and other founders would, call me and say, how did you do this? Or how did you do that? And I realized I had a deep-seated, one, passion for helping other founders, but also an understanding of how hard and lonely that journey really is. And so I launched SeedSpot to be an incubator for early stage founders then, and primarily founders that didn't have another place to go. Whether they were, tech founders often had an easy pathway into an incubator or an accelerator, but if you were a service or a product or a nonprofit, there really wasn't a place for you to go. And so building an incubator that would support those founders was the catalyst for launching SeedSpot. And that was now 13 years ago that SeedSpot launched to serve underrepresented founders and get them access to capital and mentorship and educational training.
I wonder if we can talk a little bit, Courtney, about nonprofits as businesses, because a lot of the founders who I talk to on this podcast and who I visit across the country are running their schools or learning models as nonprofits. Some run as for-profits, and there's sort of a variety of different reasons why they may choose one structure over the other. But at the end of the day, a nonprofit is a small business or a
Absolutely.
large business potentially, depending on the scale. And is that, or has that been your experience working with SeedSpot and other of your organizations and affiliations in sort of instilling that entrepreneurial mindset in someone who is a social impact entrepreneur, maybe running a nonprofit? I
Mhm.
wonder if you could shed some light on that.
You bet. Yeah, I think there's so much narrative around like nonprofit is, social good and for profit is bad or profitable only. And this blurring of the line now between nonprofits being sustainable businesses and for profits doing social good. And you're seeing that both in legislative, like I actually and we passed, SeedSpot did the legislation in Arizona for benefit corporations, which was like the hybrid between, a for-profit that was doing public benefit. And so that was, 12 years ago that authorization came through, and now it's, nationwide that for-profits can apply for a benefit corporation status. But it's interesting to see this like blurring of lines, and so many nonprofit executives and founders that I've worked with too perceive profit as a bad thing, right? Or something that is not attainable or something that cannot be earned. And certainly the IRS has limitations around how much you can earn as revenue and how much has to be philanthropically funded. But I think so many nonprofit and school founders, the ability to see that profit is good as it leads to scale and overcoming that mental hurdle that you do need to make profit, you do need to pay yourself. So many founders of schools and nonprofits, as you well know, sacrifice that first. And if you're not sustaining one, yourself, two, your team, and three, the organization, it all collapses. And so I've worked with a lot of founders, getting them in the mindset of seeing business as a force for good, and this notion that for profit or just this mental model of profitability can be a really helpful thing in scaling your venture.
I love that. So you have a lot of connections with Arizona State University, certainly starting with your experience as an undergrad there. You're a senior advisor now as part of ASU Prep. And I've talked before about how much I love ASU Prep, ASU Prep Digital, Prep Global. My kids have participated in various ASU Prep programs. There's a micro school fellowship through ASU Prep now. So many good things happening there. And I understand your kids have, or at least some of your kids have participated in ASU Prep's programs. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about some of the things you're seeing through ASU Prep.
hmm I think as a parent, I can definitely speak to it in that, the flexibility that digital models offer, and ASU Prep Digital specifically, we benefited from as a family in our first actually iteration of my new venture. And how do you handle the core academics, but not spend all day doing it? And so ASU Prep provided our family with a lot of flexibility. Our daughter did ASU Prep in elementary school and second grade, and we saw that she could really consolidate her core learning to 2 to 3 hours in the morning. And as a homeschool family, that opened up the floodgates for all this other interesting programming in the afternoon. And I think so many emerging models are coming to that. You have Alpha and other things out there, looking at how do you consolidate the core academics so that the applied learning is what really happens. And that's what really excited us about the potential to build a new model and think through creatively how do you reimagine the entire educational system and the structure of the day and the way students interact both with technology and with the community and with others. And so I've seen it as just a huge benefit, and so many families now, using ASU Prep as that same catalyst to kind of unbundle what a traditional system might look like and use it in a way that really format fits to their family lifestyle or to their students' needs.
So I know now you live in California and your kids attend a micro school there. Was ASU Prep the sort of entry point for you into unconventional education? Had you been thinking about, something different for your own kids? I know you reflected on your own K to 12 experience, but I'm curious as a parent, what drew you to various unconventional models, whether it's ASU Prep or micro schooling and so on.
Mhm. Yeah, it was interesting. So we were in Austin at the time that we started public school, and a good public school, well rated, dual language, and it was everything from the 7 20 a.m. drop off, which our daughter was a sleeper, and that was just brutal for the whole family, all the way through the 3:15 pickup, and the meltdowns that came after, the pressure cooker that I observed her being in, the rigidity of the system, and the lack of permeability as a parent, to get into the classroom, to see what was happening, to observe. And it felt like I was sending my child off, and I was, for the largest chunk of their, waking hours. And it just kind of shook me as a parent to be like, what am I doing here? Like, is this system really best for our kids? I think it certainly works for some, but for our kids, is this really the best system for our lifestyle, our temperament? My husband's an entrepreneur as well, our lifestyle, is this really the best suited thing? And we just hard stopped and questioned that everyone else is doing it, but should we? And it was a real moment. And I read your book and your first book, and it was this like, wait a second, maybe there's a better way, and maybe I can uncondition my own thinking in realizing that this might not be the best path. Just because it's always been the path doesn't mean that it has to be now. And so I think so much now of the movement of homeschooling and unschooling and alternative education, now it's like trendy and cool, but are becoming more so, hopefully. But it was a challenge, honestly, as a parent, to like uncouple from that system and break away from the quote unquote norm. But we did it and haven't looked back with any regret.
Yeah, you haven't looked back, and now you're adding to and expanding the variety of education options available to families. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about one of your latest ventures, All One Thing, building intergenerational learning spaces. Tell us about what that is and sort of how that came to be.
For sure. So it was honestly like coming off of ASU Prep. We were, using that for the core academic morning. But then as working parents, it was like, what do we do with the afternoon?
Yeah.
And so we started to program spaces around the community in Austin at the time. We would go to a rock climbing gym and convince them to, hey, can you take a handful of kids and teach them kind of gravity and physics and rock climbing? And so the idea was that we would use community assets and use those as learning hubs, but also enable parents to be on site with their kids. So we would have co-working space there. We'd have coffee carts out front. So you could walk in as a family. I could get a latte. I could sit down at a proper desk. I could have Wi-Fi, and my kids could be proximate learning something. And so we had a network of these locations across Austin. We had an app in the App Store. Parents could log in and say, like, I want to go here today. I want to go to the bakery and learn math through the lens of baking, or I want to go to the rock climbing gym, or I want to go to this architecture firm and learn architecture. And so we had this distributed network of assets essentially from the community, and really reimagining like the town square as it used to be,
Yeah.
and thinking through like, how do you leverage the community assets then to teach kids? And that's how we used to do education. You used to live in the village, you'd have the town square, the neighbors would teach, the local blacksmith would teach, the shop owner would teach, and you were immersed in a community. And so as we tried to recreate that, what we learned was that it was awesome. Families loved it. We had about 70 families with us in Austin at the time that were bouncing around to locations, but it also became a drive across town and you were bouncing around to locations. And so in this iteration, and what we're launching now, is a physical space that brings those community assets together. And so we're building a physical location. The first will be here in Los Angeles, the second in Austin. And we have a fellowship program running now for other founders in other cities that want to launch these in their markets. But the idea is that you walk in and you have kind of a market, a cafe, a coffee shop. You can grab things as a family, grab and go, breakfast or lunch. The parents have a workspace that they can gather in, and not just work, but build community. So much of the educational system is lacking that connection with other parents. And then students will have any number of classes that they can tap into that are taught by individuals from the community, maybe former educators that retired, maybe the local grandma coming in to teach, sourdough bread making, or the tech executive down the street that wants to come in for an hour and teach AI or coding or robotics or whatever it may be, but using the community as the resource and creating these spaces. And then at nighttime, that same elder can learn AI from the teenagers, and I as a parent can learn self-defense, or just creating these like learning hubs where the learning happens fluidly and all generations can access the space to do that.
Ah, amazing. So with the students, or were they in Texas, homeschoolers, and will they be homeschoolers in your new physical space in LA? That's how you're
Yes,
running that?
that's the vision at the moment.
Yeah.
in part, yeah, homeschoolers have the flexibility to adapt
Sure.
into new models and leverage spaces like this. I think as ESA funding becomes more widely accessible, sadly, not in California probably anytime soon, but certainly in Texas, considering what does it take to become accredited or what does it take to become a vendor partner. But the idea is that, yes, those that are seeking alternative models of education can tap into all one thing locations. And the vision is that as we launch these in partnership with other parents across the country, that if you're a member of an all one thing Los Angeles, you can bounce into all one thing Austin or all one thing Minneapolis or all one thing Bend, Oregon. And as you travel as a family or just want to experience something new, each of those locations will have some local context. If you're in all one thing Bozeman, there might be, a Western style horseback riding lesson attached to the all one thing location that you can walk out, and do some horseback riding or farming in Asheville or, those types of things that are local to the context and dependent on the physical real estate, there being some new amenities that families can tap into.
Ah, incredible. And so do you imagine that some families would be able to use All One Thing as kind of a 5 day a week full-time schooling alternative?
Mhm. That's the vision. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about, I mean, it sounds like it's this blend of co-learning, co-working, kind of immersive education. What about for families who may not have job flexibility, may not be able to be remote or hybrid workers? How does that work for them?
Yeah, the idea is that after school and weekends that the space is still open. I think, looking at it just from a pure real estate standpoint, there's so much lost time in schools real estate. It closes at 3, it sits dormant from usually 4 p.m. until 7 a.m. the next morning. And as we're looking at all one thing, how do we program after school programming? How do we program evening programming? How do we offer weekend programming? And so many working parents, myself included, your student might be done from a traditional school at 3:30, but you still have conference calls until 5. Where do you
Hmm.
go? And I've often found myself as the parent sitting in the parking lot as, one kid's in yoga class or
Yeah.
jujitsu and my other kid's in the back seat on a tablet while I finish a Zoom call in the car. And I think those moments impart questions like, what am I doing here? And why can't I be in a space if I still have some work to do, that I could drop in and know that I have continuity of one, care for my children, and two, enriching activities for them to do. And they're not just on a tablet or sitting in the car while one's in an activity. And so we're hopeful that the spaces provide continuity for families that need coverage after school, evenings, or weekends, and they can drop in and still find interesting classes.
But for the school day alternative, the expectation would be that kids and parents are together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or that you can drop certainly, and
Okay.
and if you need to go somewhere, the
Great.
continuity of classes would be kind of every hour on the hour that you could drop your student if you needed to work in a office location and then
Great.
come back at 3 or 4 o'clock.
Yeah, and you mentioned the real estate. You have this real estate, or traditional schools have real estate that's often unused. Location, real estate, zoning, occupancy, building codes tend to be the biggest headache I hear about from micro school founders and other education entrepreneurs creating in-person learning spaces. Have you cracked that nut then, Courtney, of kind of figuring out how to deal with some of these challenges?
We're in the middle of it right now, Carrie. I actually have a call today with the city of Santa Monica. We have our eye on a building that, yes, the zoning is such a hang up sometimes. We, because of the nature of what we're doing, fall into a little bit of a different nuance in that we're not a traditional school.
Hmm.
We're not a daycare.
Hmm.
We're not necessarily, we're in this weird middle ground. And so community assembly is the kind of catch-all term for models like this. And so we do fall into some zoning options in community assembly buildings. That's often former churches, former, community spaces, those types of things that make it very easy to drop into. But we are looking, there's a few different, if you can combine like a zone for, a coffee shop with classes, you can kind of get in there, but it's tricky and every market's going to be different. So ideally, we'd have kind of a repeatable process that we go into new markets and look, but we're deep in the weeds right now, navigating through and have consultants and folks working on our team to figure out how do we scale these and find kind of a repeatable process for other founders and other markets to do this with us. So that's part of the fellowship. And like we're sharing our learnings, we're kind of building in public as we learn things, we share them with other founders. And so this cohort will start on today, actually, is our new cohort of fellows, our first one. And, being able just to build together. I think so much of this is about building community and how do we build in community with other people and learn from each other. So each market's going to be a little bit different, but we hope to share our findings, and what we do widely with as many people as we we can, because there's so much need for spaces, to be activated. And there's 1 billion square feet of vacant real estate in the US right now. 1 billion.
Mm.
And so, like, why are these spaces not being activated as these robust community hubs, for learning and community building to take place, is one of our core kind of questions and missions in life, is to resolve that and use the vacant space to create robust hubs for families to gather.
Wow. So is the launch date of this flagship location of All One Thing in LA dependent on which building you find, or do you have families already in the wings waiting for this?
We
What's that
do.
like?
Yeah, our model has been using existing spaces for pop-ups. So if you visualize kind of our arc of launching in a new city, we do what we did in Austin. We go into existing spaces and we pop up locations, and we bolt on co-working, and we bolt on some, accommodations of food and vendors and the core enriching activity for the student. But we've been using pop-up locations as kind of the catalyst to build momentum. So in Los Angeles, we've hosted dozens of pop-ups to build momentum and show, even in a microcosm, even in a 2-hour block, like, isn't this lovely? Wouldn't
Mm.
it be great if this existed 7 days a week, 24/7? And so the pop-ups has been our kind of launching point, and will continue to be in new markets. And then as we build momentum and traction, we will deploy capital into the physical pieces of real estate. And so we're at that inflection point in Los Angeles. We have a good base in Austin. And then as fellows join us across the country, we hope that many of them build the same momentum that we have, and that we can catalyze together, a capital fund and get real estate rolling. But that's kind of the model. So it's not hanging us up, like we're still doing pop-ups and still activating community, but it certainly is the biggest leverage point to say, like, we're open and we've got a physical location where all this is happening in one place.
Yeah, and a great template for prospective microschool founders to follow, other education entrepreneurs who may be listening to the podcast, creating some pop-ups, start with an MVP, right? That sort of minimum viable
Mhm.
product, get something out there, get your name known in your community. I wonder what other advice, certainly as a seasoned entrepreneur, you might have for people who are new to entrepreneurship, especially school founders and those creating unconventional learning models.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is, like, don't go it alone. It's a really lonely journey to be a founder. And I say that from experience. My first nonprofit, I was, a solo founder. I did have the incubation support eventually of the university, and then we had cohorts, and I had but it's a grind if you're a solo founder. And so I would say find a program, whether it's the ASU Prep Microschool Fellowship Program, Seed Spot, my former organization, does incubation. I mean, there's so many, KaiPod and Prenda, and, like, there's so many great models out there that you can tag onto and have access to a support network. So first advice would be, don't go it alone. Second is just start. I've met so
Mm.
many founders that are so worried about the perfectionist of, like, well, I don't have the website exactly right, or I don't have the space yet, or I don't have, the curriculum fully figured out. Like, if you have a vision and can cast that vision and start to get people on board with it, that's what builds momentum, and it builds your own confidence to be like, oh, there's demand. Oh, there's interest. We better get rolling. And certainly that, personally, as a founder, was, even in my third venture, that's intimidating. And that's like a scary thing to step into, to put yourself back out there in the world and, like, hey, I'm doing this new thing. Does anybody want it? But I think taking that leap of faith and letting the momentum kind of build, and just start evangelizing and talking about what you're doing, and the momentum breeds momentum.
So many exciting projects that you've been involved with and are still involved with. I wonder if we could spend a few minutes talking about Sunschool,
Mhm.
which is an open source AI tutor for educational transparency. Tell us a little bit about what that project is. How is it different from other AI learning tools?
Yeah, great question. We, as a family, saw so many of the great AI tools out there. They're all proprietary. They all have
Mm.
APIs. You don't have access to the data. You don't see the prompt to understand what your child is learning. And I think in the era of AI, the lack of transparency can be tricky. And my husband, he's been in AI in his whole, formative career, and seeing the evolution of the parents' ability to own the data and the students' ability to see transparently what they're learning. And so we built Sun School for our own kids. They use it twice a week as their kind of AI tutor. and they can go in and say, I want to learn math today, but I want it through the learn it through the lens of Pokemon. Or I want to learn,
Mm.
I want to write something today, but I want to do it inspired by Frida Kahlo's art or whatever it might be. And they have directional control of the prompts. You as a parent can see the prompts, and you can also direct the prompts, and you can choose, like, what is it that you care about? Do you care about state standard alignment? Do you care about just, being on grade level? What is it that you want? And having that control and flexibility in an AI model is totally possible, and being able to use the tool wherever you are. So we recently ran a pop-up at Edge Esmeralda, which is this very cool gathering of kind of tech leaders and entrepreneurs and like bleeding edge new movement builders. They pop up these villages all over the world, and we did a pop-up at their pop-up, but we connected the Sunschool tool to a laptop, to a solar panel, to a Starlink to
Mm.
enable fully off-grid learning. And so the idea is that Sunschool can go with you wherever you are, if you're traveling, if you're camping, if you're off-grid. But the idea is to like unbundle and really open source the entire model so that families have fluidity in one, where and how their learning happens, and two, visibility into how their learning happens. So I think some of the core elements is really kind of the open source model. We visualize it as kind of the Linux of learning, and that it's a truly open source platform, and that we bring other developers in to add on feature sets and everything else, but that it's designed again in public, it's open, you can see it all transparently, and that creates kind of a next level of accountability, to the platform itself and what you can do with it.
Mm. Courtney, you have such an interesting vantage point on K to 12 education as a parent, as a practitioner, an entrepreneur, as an advisor to education organizations. Where do you see this going? Where do you see K-12 education going over the next decade?
Where I hope it goes is a joyful, empowering, autonomous, like your ability as a kid, as a parent, to choose your own adventure, to design within so many different options, to not be bound to a one size fits all model with rote memorization and standardized tests, but that the entire, and I wouldn't even say K-12, but kind of K through college or K through
Mm.
post-secondary evolves with it. And you're seeing it that at the university level. But how do we just reimagine in the era of AI, giving kids educational freedom and the ability to choose their own adventure and decide what format of education works for them, what style of education, what building or not building do they want to be in, what and how do they want to learn, and enabling a movement of educational founders, which we're certainly seeing in the microschool founder movement. We're certainly seeing in the unlock of ESA funding that there's so many more choices for kids and for families. And so I see this as being like the rainbow of like, you have so many options as a parent, hopefully ubiquitized, hopefully universal, hopefully accessible to all,
Mm.
without constraints, that any family, regardless of zip code or any, that you can access great educational opportunities for your kids. Like, that's where I hope it goes. I think there's certainly forces and barriers fighting against that, but I really hope that there is just educational freedom and that every family can choose their own adventure.
I hope that too. So as we begin to wrap up, Courtney, I'd love to have you just reflect a bit on what it's like to be an entrepreneur. What have you found to be fulfilling about that experience, challenging? What is it like to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I don't know any different in some ways.
Mm.
I started so early in my career. I have found it to be both like the most challenging and the most rewarding. I have friends and colleagues that, clock in at 9, they're off at 5. It's like, well, that seems nice. You're never off as a founder, you're never off as an entrepreneur. But the ability, I think, to integrate life with your work has been the greatest joy, and that it is all one thing, not to overplay our name, but as a parent, I, even when I was running Seed Spot, I had my daughter. I was, CEO. I'm traveling all over the country, and my daughter did 200 flights before she turned 2. I took her everywhere. She came to every board meeting, every staff retreat. She had an office in my office. And we just lived life together, And as parents, I think my husband and I both having the flexibility of work, you're kind of always working, but you're always have the flexibility to not, or to check out. And so it's created a lot of, I think, freedom for us to dictate our day and our time and how we spend that as a family and how we spend that with our kids. And I found great joy in that. It's challenging at times to juggle all of those aspects, but I think the freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur far outweighs the challenges, and we've certainly lived that. And I think the goal for me is just like living an integrated life. And so much of what I'm trying to build at All One Thing is to lean even more into that, to just like build the space that we can all be as a family. And my husband can do his AI, tinkers and meetups and things, and my kids can have social life, and I can have community with other moms, and these spaces that we've just lost in society, the connective tissue that keeps us all together.
I love that. And encouraging other founders, including through All One Thing and the fellowship program you have there. So, if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about All One Thing, about Sun School, your other ventures, kind of keep connected with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yes. Allonething.xyz and sunschool.xyz. The fellowship, we're just about to flip the application cycle for next spring. So if anyone wants to join us in the spring, that will go live, and you're welcome to apply there. And Sun School, we're taking early adopters and people that just want to try it out with us. So please hit us up if you want to join us on that journey as well.
Ah, so exciting. Well, I look forward to following along and seeing these ventures take hold and new ventures that I'm sure in the future for you as well, Courtney, as sort of a lifelong entrepreneur. Courtney Klein, thank you so much for being on the LiberatED podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Carrie.